Okay, so hi everyone. Now I would like to continue this series on the Norse religion, and I did a video on the creation story. But I think one of the important things to look at to start understanding and learning about the Norse religion is to go over the cosmology, like the different worlds. So then, when you read and go on to read the stories, that you kind of have a better understanding of all the different ones. So I thought I'd start off by talking about the tree Yggdrasil. Now, Yggdrasil is the center of the universe in the Norse religion. Its trunk goes right up in the middle between the worlds, and the worlds, of which there are 9, are spread at different points over Yggdrasil. Due to this, the quality of the worlds, the state of the worlds, really depends on the state of Yggdrasil, because it's such a massive component to the whole universe. And when the tree trembles, that signals the start of Ragnarok, which is a big event in the Norse religion, and I will do a video on that in the future. But let's look at what the word Yggdrasil means. So the first part of the word Yggre means terrible, and if you are familiar with Odin and how the Norse people perceived him, they perceived him as being terrible, but not the kind of terrible you think of in today's meaning. Back then, it meant strong, powerful, able to instill terror in people. So that was a word commonly used to describe Odin. Now, um, the last part of the word Drasil means horse, so combine them both together and you get the horse of Odin. And this references the time Odin actually sacrificed himself at the tree to gain the knowledge of the runes. He hung himself from the Yggdrasil. And according to the poem Völuspá, the tree is the friend of the clear sky, so tall, so it's so tall that it reaches all the way up to the sky. And at the top, in all the leaves are covered in snow, like the snow-capped mountains, and fresh dew runs off them, off its leaves. No one knows where the roots go, as they go all the way down into the underworld, which no one is able to see apart from shamans until they die. So that bit's a bit of a mystery. And Yggdrasil, like any normal tree, is teeming with wildlife, with animals. First of all, down at its roots, you have a dragon called Nidhogg. I'm sorry if I get any pronunciations wrong in this. I'm trying. So that's this dragon's at the root of the tree, surrounded by loads of snakes, which lurk around, the base of the tree. An eagle lives way in the top branches, and I don't know if there's any reason for this, but a squirrel called Ratotskr, which means drill tooth, goes up and down the trunk, conveying insults between the eagle at the top and the dragon at the bottom. And as I said, I don't know why this started. I need to do a bit of research, but I've not really heard the reason why the eagle and the dragon are sending insults to each other. There are also 4 stags, Dane, Dvalin, Dunir, and Durethro, and they graze the leaves at the top. It was commonly believed there were 3 main routes of Yggdrasil. One goes into Midgard, which is one of the worlds. One goes into another world, Jotunheim, and the other goes straight down into hell. And in a poem, it is mentioned that under the tree, there's a well called the Well of Erd, and this is where the gods have their daily council. I did have a diagram of Yggdrasil and how like all the worlds work around it, but I left my sketchbook downstairs, so I'm not going to go and get that. But if you get a copy of the Prose Edda, which is a huge compilation of Norse literature, there is a really good diagram of what the tree is supposed to look like with the animals and the worlds. Okay, so next we move on to the 9 worlds that surround Yggdrasil, and these worlds are said to be home to various different beings that the Norse believed, and it was believed that all the worlds except Midgard were invisible, but could occasionally manifest in aspects of the visible world. Okay, so I think the best place to start is Midgard. Now, this is essentially Earth, where humans call their home, and Earth is inhabited by a sea serpent called Jörmungandr, and well, as I said, he lives in the sea and circles the land of Midgard. Now, also in the sea, you have Aegir and Ran, and they claim the lives of seafarers. Now, this would have been particularly worrying for the Norse people, as many of them, Vikings, travelled to new lands, and they had boats, and they would travel long distances from their homeland via the sea. So I can imagine why this particular story would have been quite frightening to them. Now, the word Midgard has a double meaning. So the first refers to the civilization in the middle of the world, and the rest of the world around it is wild, which is reflected also in the cosmological plane, by Midgard being surrounded by the wilderness of Jotunheim, the world of hostile giants. And then this is kind of akin in the way the continents are surrounded by the ocean, which was apparently also teeming with giants. Now, the second meaning of Midgard refers to its position below Asgard, and then above the underworld. Yggdrasil holds Asgard in its upper branches and Midgard at the base of the trunk in the underworld, in the roots. Now, in both senses of the word, ultimately refers to Midgard's place in the psychogeographic destination between Innengard and Utengard. Now, these 2 words are ones I'll be referring to in this video quite a bit, because it's a very important concept if you're looking into Norse, into the Norse religion. So, things that are considered Innengard, or inside the fence, were seen as orderly, lawful, civilized, and then Utengard means beyond the fence, which means chaotic, wild, unlawful. And this applies to the geographical plane as well, and as well as like the human psyche. Midgard is considered in between, but God in the name implies it's striving to be like Asgard, which is like the ultimate Innengard. Now let's move on to talk about Asgard, and Asgard is the home of the Aesir, which is a particular tribe of gods, and it's located in the sky, like in the top branches like I talked about, and there is a bridge that connects Midgard to Asgard called the Bifrost, and the Bifrost is very colourful, and it's like a rainbow bridge. And then we've got the third world, Vanaheim. Now, this is home to another tribe of gods called the Vanir, and who are more associated with like fertility and nature as opposed to the Aesir tribe of gods in Asgard. Um, Surviving sources in the of Norse mythology doesn't give much evidence of where Vandenheim actually lays, like on Yggdrasil. But in one poem, uh, Lokosena, which means the taunting of Loki, it does give a clue, and it states that the Vanir god Njord was taken hostage during the very end of the Aesir-Vanir War, and he was taken east to Asgard, so that suggests that Vanaheim is actually west of Asgard, but that's the only clue we have really. And it can be inferred by the Hime in the name that it's quite a wild word and less cultured, as it tends to be with the worlds beginning with Hime. It's considered Utengard. Now, if we move on to Jotunheim, this is the homeland of the giants and is extremely Utengard, so beyond the fence, less civilized. In the Prose Eddas, there have the home of the giants are said to be deep and dark forests or mountain peaks, where winter never ends and it's very unhospitable. Then we move on to the world Niflheim, which is the home of primordial darkness, cold, mist and ice. So this doesn't sound as civilized as Asgard. It's probably very Utengard. Then you've got Muspelheim, which is the home of the fire giants. And during Ragnarok, the fire giant Surt arrives from the south with a flaming sword to slay the gods and burn the world. There is reference to this in the film Thor Ragnarok, but it's a highly inaccurate kind of portrayal. So it was, if you watch the film and you see the fire giant Surtur, I think it's called, in the film, just know that's not an accurate representation of Ragnarok. For the as I was saying, he has a flaming sword to kill the gods and burn the world. Now, the Norse people did believe that the world started and would end in flames, and you remember if you watch my last video on the creation story that I mentioned flames from Muspelheim travel to the dark abyss. I'm not going to attempt its name again, but yeah. Then you have Afelheim, which is home to the elves. Elves are a popular concept in the Norse religion, and they're kind of seen as a class of demigods, so they're not like full gods, but they're still quite divine. The elves are supposedly more beautiful than the sun, so it was kind of their world was seen as kind of beautiful and gracious and just full of light and beauty. And the Vanir god Freyr is said to be the ruler of Alfheim, though some scholars are unsure about this. But the relationship between the elves and the Vanir is very ambiguous, but there's a lot of overlap between the two groups. So Freyr's position of ruler shouldn't be that surprising. It's quite likely, but we'll never know for certain at this point. Then we've got Svartalheim, and this is home to the dwarfs, who are master craftsmen, and they live underground. It was probably thought of as a land that was just full of complex mining systems and forges. Now we come on to the last world of Hell. Now Hell raises red flags, but it's not like the Christian Hell. And this Hell is only spelled with one L and not two, like the Christian concept of Hell. But this is the underworld where many of the dead go once they've died, and it is ruled by the goddess Hel. So Hel and Hel, um, and like physical graves, it's um, underground. It's under the roots of Yggdrasil, and sometimes it's said to have a dog guarding its gates, which I don't think is an unusual concept. I've heard this about other religions before. Um, in As I said, it's not like the Christian concept of hell, and it is known that in the Norse religion, where you end up after death isn't like some kind of moral reward, and hell is kind of regarded in a positive or at least a neutral light. So it's not like fiery brimstones and scary. It's The world is viewed as being quite abundant of life. It's just the other side of death. And the dead would spend their time as any Norseman who was living would do. They would drink, they would fight and celebrate, etc. Um, it wasn't a place of bliss or torment, it was just a continuation of life somewhere else. And that's all I've got for now. So thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something new. I will leave a link to NorseMythology.org again because I think that's a really good source. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I will always encourage you to go and read for these things yourselves. If you want to read some really good Norse texts, I would recommend buying the prose editor, and it's quite cheap online. So I'll leave a link to that as well, but thank you for listening.